With the recent insurrection at the Capitol building, it is more clear now than ever that the United States are no longer united. This country is more divided than ever on every single issue, and has been this way for decades. It seems impossible to reach a compromise on anything, so naturally, that is exactly what I'm going to try and do in this video. I wanted to start this list off with something that's a little less heavy and not too controversial. To the more religious and evangelical, legalizing marijuana may seem like a bad idea, but I hope those who are will hear me out at this point. The morality of using marijuana can be debated all day, but what isn't debatable is how much better of a solution weed is for pain medication than opioids that have been killing tens of thousands of Americans each year. Marijuana does not contain addictive substances, and is physically impossible to overdose on. The counterpoint that's most often brought up is the slippery slope argument, and how marijuana is a gateway drug. While there is a correlation between marijuana use and other hard drugs, what often gets ignored is the far greater amount of people who become addicted to hard drugs because of legally prescribed opioids. Drugs like Oxycontin, morphine, and codeine are much easier to get a hold of, and are far more addictive. While there certainly is concern that legalizing marijuana will result in more people falling down the opioid rabbit hole, the evidence is only corollary. In other words, while people who end up taking drugs like cocaine or heroin often started on weed, there are far more people who just smoke weed and stop there. One of the first things you learn in any statistics class is correlation does not prove causation, and this is a perfect example of that. In addition to the lack of health risks, marijuana is also a booming trade. In 2019, the marijuana industry in Colorado made nearly $2 billion in revenue. One may argue about the ethics of the government profiting off of the distribution of a drug, but that argument gets trumped by the fact that those $2 billion earned in Colorado was a $2 billion loss for drug cartels. And lastly, and in my opinion most importantly, according to a recent study published in 2020 by the Data for Progress, it found that 69% of Democrats want full legalization, as well as 54% of Republicans. While the support may not be as high as other nonpartisan issues included in this video, it's still a majority.
No, I just remember it being so much brighter, I guess.
Before 2016, everyone in America agreed that there needed to be some serious changes to the American healthcare system, and it was a huge talking point on both sides of the aisle. While Trump was critical of Obamacare and ended up getting rid of it when he came into office, while on the campaign trail he talked fondly of Medicare for all. While he may not have delivered on fixing our healthcare system, it is still a hugely talked about topic, especially within the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. 31.5 million Americans were uninsured by the end of 2020 due to losing their job because of COVID, a 2 million uptick since 2019. Until December of last year, I was included in that list because I simply couldn't afford it. The most popular plan to help fix this crisis is Medicare for All, proposed by Bernie Sanders. This plan has been around for decades, and was even supported by figureheads like JFK and Martin Luther King Jr., but only in recent years has it really started to soar in popularity. According to recent polls, 69% of Americans support Medicare for All, including 46% of Republicans. While not a majority, it's still nearly half. And since 88% of Democrats support it, I think it's fair to say Medicare for All should be a nonpartisan issue. Since I'm arguing Medicare for All is something that everyone should support, I'm going to give a brief defense of it that may combat some of the misunderstandings surrounding it. Firstly, it's not a one-year plan. It will take many years to slowly transition America from private insurance to single-payer. It includes plans for job reassignment so that the 1.5 million workers in the health insurance industry won't be out of a job. Another major criticism is how much it will cost, an estimated $34 trillion. While this number seems extremely high, there are multiple ways that the bill will compensate for it. Firstly, the majority of the $34 trillion would come from the tax increase on the 1%. However, the point that I believe that gets overlooked a lot is that while the cost may be high, the payoff is incredible. It turns out that when everyone has access to free healthcare, estimates show in the long run it will increase America's GDP far more than it would cost to implement. This is due to Americans no longer having to worry about medical debt, but also being able to live more healthy. Think about how many Americans live every day with health issues, not going to a doctor because they can't afford to. Think about all the productivity lost to people who can't afford to fix all the minor health issues they have. Another way it saves money is it cuts out the middleman. Instead of paying for insurance who pays for your medical bills, the money goes straight from the government to the hospitals. This is a system that works great in nearly every other developed country in the world. The number one criticism of nationalized healthcare is the wait times. After all, it's a fact. People do tend to wait longer for non-emergency services in countries such as the UK and Canada. This is due not to nationalized healthcare, but lack of funding. If the UK increased their funding, which the majority of citizens want despite the tax increase, they'll be able to reduce wait times. This is probably the most debatable inclusion on this list, as there are a lot of people who are very passionate about their guns. I promise, I'm not advocating for taking away anyone's guns. There are just some pretty basic laws that need to be put in place to help reduce the number of mass shootings in the United States. Before we go into what can be done to prevent gun violence, I should probably bring up the statistics that show how much of a problem it really is. While a lot of media focus has been on Black Lives Matter, the November election, and of course the coronavirus, something I didn't learn until doing research for this video is that 2020 has had the most mass shootings in American history, with 578. That's over 100 more than the previous year. While some may contribute this to civil unrest, or being in an economic recession, mass shootings have been on the rise for decades. Here's a chart for the number of injuries and deaths in mass shootings since the 1960s. And the rising growth is sickening. But why is this happening? There are many different theories and speculations. Some blame it on mental health issues, some blame it on violent video games, and some blame it on not having enough guns. The issue with all these claims is that they don't factor in the reality that every other country in the world that doesn't have nearly as many mass shootings has violent video games and mental health issues, and also a whole lot less guns. So is the solution that simple? Just take away people's guns and no more mass shootings? I mean, some would argue it would work, but realistically, it never really will. Americans love their guns way too much, and it goes directly against the Constitution. Besides, there are more effective measures that can be taken. I want to try and outline some of them here. Let's start off with a less controversial one. We need more effective and thorough background checks. While currently mandatory for gun purchases at retail stores, this doesn't apply to guns sold at gun shows, on the internet, and private sales. Applying background checks universally would help stop any criminals or people suffering from violent mental disorders from obtaining a firearm. And this is something that is universally supported. 94% of Americans support this, including 92% of Republicans, according to a May Quinnipiac poll. While universal background checks will certainly help, it only addresses part of the problem. The main problem is certain guns that are designed to shoot multiple rounds in seconds, or semi-automatic rifles. 66% of Americans are in favor of banning semi-automatic assault weapons, according to a Fox News poll, and is the best possible way to limit the number of deaths in mass shootings. Here's a list of all the deadliest shootings from American history, and what gun was used in the massacres. In the top 30, all of which resulted in 10 deaths or more, only 2 used non-semi-automatic weapons. There is absolutely nothing wrong with owning guns to protect your home, or to hunt, or even for recreational use. But when certain weapons have been used to massacre thousands of innocent American civilians, enough is enough. The main counter-argument that people use is, well, if the shooter doesn't have a gun, they'll just use a knife or a car. Well, this is certainly true. This logic has 2 main flaws. Firstly, knives and cars are not created to be weapons. They're created to be tools. While many argue guns are a tool as well, they are a tool that's designed for killing. Secondly, and more importantly, unless you're Diego from Umbrella Academy, the amount of damage you can inflict with a knife or car isn't even comparable to a semi-automatic weapon. If you have an AR-15 with 30 bullets in the clip, That's an easy 10 to 15 deaths you can incur in a matter of seconds in a crowded room. Even if you have a pistol, depending on the clip size, the amount of damage you can do isn't even comparable either. And that's why mass shooters don't use them. In the wake of the gruesome death of George Floyd, the whole nation seemed to come together and all agreed that there needs to be some accountability for the police. 95% of US citizens agree that there needs to be some level of police reform, according to the Associated Press. However, with the protests that sometimes turned to riots and looting in the aftermath, a lot of public opinion began to change. The same critique that was brought up after Trayvon Martin's death was echoed once again. I agree there needs to be change, but we can't just have people causing riots. It hurts the cause. This is a pretty reasonable critique, but it raises the question, what has been done to reform the police? Unfortunately, next to nothing has changed. With half the public's focus being drawn on the riots, and bad faith reporting on the potential criminality of some of the innocent lives taken, police accountability has gotten lost in the shuffle. I'm certainly not going to advocate for abolishing the police. I'm not even going to advocate for defunding. Instead, there needs to be a redistribution of funds that helps train cops on de-escalation, a method that has been proven to be far more effective in restraining criminals than power dominance. However, another fact that is not brought up nearly enough is that the police need to be held accountable for misconduct, just like any other profession. If a cop kills your family member in front of you and doesn't have a body camera on, unless you record on your phone, the law will always side with law enforcement. Heck, even if you do film it and share the footage online, there's still a good chance that nothing will happen to the cop. It is not enough that the cops who killed Elijah McClain for the crime of playing music were put on desk duty. They need to be behind bars. It is not enough that the cops who killed Breonna Taylor for the crime of sleeping were charged with reckless shooting. They need to be behind bars. It is not enough that the cops who shot Jacob Blake 7 times in the back for the crime of opening his car door has been charged with, oh, look at that, nothing. Policemen are not the Punisher. They aren't Batman or any other superhero. They are men and women who put on a badge to serve the American people, and they need to be held accountable when they harm instead of protect. There needs to be an exact standard for how and when to use force. There needs to be prosecution against officers who use excessive force, and officers need to be held liable to report any misconduct by any other officer. And easiest of all, body cameras. There is so much more I could get into about the criminal justice system. How the United States has the highest percentage of prisoners per population in the entire world, how the majority of prisons are privately owned and run for profit, how African Americans are 20% more likely to receive longer sentences for the exact same crime as white Americans. But that would require a whole video of its own, and frankly, I'm too exhausted to go into it all right now. If you're anything like me, seeing all these numbers is raising one big question in your mind. If the majority of Americans support legalization of marijuana, if they support reforming our healthcare system, if they support reforming the police and having better gun control laws, why are none of these things happening? That's a great question. That leads me to the number one on this list, and the most fundamental problem with American democracy. When the United States was first formed, campaign donations were a foreign concept. The Founding Fathers didn't have political ads posted on cherrywood trees promising to increase tax on British imports. The first president to run a campaign was Andrew Jackson, who handed out flyers about why you should vote for him. While he didn't accept monetary donations, he did give jobs to his most loyal backers, which is a trend that has never gone away. In the following decades, other presidential candidates followed Jackson's footsteps, getting progressively worse. In 1896, President McKinley received $16 million for his campaign, $6 million of which was given under the pretext he'd be pro-big business. It was during this campaign that the public started to realize that there may be a teensy-weensy issue here. In 1904, President Theodore Roosevelt ran his campaign on promising to take away corporate donations, and in 1907 he passed the Tillman Act, which did exactly that. Since today, the courts have flip-flopped their position on corporate donations, depending on public opinion, but more importantly, how much they're being bribed. The most recent and impactful Supreme Court ruling on corporate donations was in 2010, when they ruled 5-4 in favor of Citizens United, which took away any restrictions on how much a corporation or person is allowed to donate to a campaign. This was an extremely unpopular ruling, and led to two grassroots candidates taking America by storm in 2016, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, both of whom were not financed by large corporations. While it's arguable how much Trump has held true to his promise of draining the swamp, what isn't arguable is public opinion on corporate donations. 66% of Republicans and 85% of Democrats want to take back the Citizens United ruling, according to a nonpartisan study by University of Maryland. It also shows that 88% want to reduce the influence of large campaign donors over lawmakers. It is unfair and undemocratic that Jeff Bezos and the Koch brothers have incomparably more influence over laws than your average Joe Schmo. And the fact that it's legal for them to donate as much as they want to any politician is criminal. If we ever want to have a voice in this country, it has to start with abolishing the Citizens United ruling and giving equal political power for all. Is it possible to take all bribery out of politics? Of course not. There always has been and always will be. But having it be legal and blatantly out there in the public is completely unacceptable. At least other democratic countries have the decency to pretend to be working for the people. I don't think that's too much to ask for our politicians. So that's my list. I have high hopes that Biden's administration will address a few of these points, but I can guarantee that he won't address most of them, especially without public pressure. If there's just one point that I hope everyone can push for, it's my last one about taking big donors out of politics. Unfortunately, since both sides have deep corporate pockets, I can't imagine this happening anytime soon. But with enough public pressure and with the right candidate, this very well could happen. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you walked out of it learning a thing or two. If you disagree with any of my points, or think there is another law that I should have included, leave it down in the comments below. I'll be reading and replying to all. Thank you for watching, and subscribe if you want to see more content like this in the future. I don't have any particular brand of content that I post, but I can guarantee I'll definitely have more political commentary in the future. But until then, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.